Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard the Wright Flyer. I'm Randy Wright, and I'll be your captain on this solo flight special edition of our state-of-the-art radio program. Folks, this will be the final boarding call, so if you please, claim your seats, fasten your seatbelts, kick back, relax, and enjoy the show while I go ahead and delve into the pre-flight checklist, as there really is a lot of news and information to get to before I may fully indulge you with your in-flight entertainment. Well, folks, here we are just a few days after the Cuban state-run television of that communist island located a mere 90 miles to the south of the state of Florida announced that longtime Cuban strongman and dictator Fidel Castro passed away, and we see that the frothing at the mouth Fabian socialist leftists are all in a tizzy, attempting to basically reciprocate or resuscitate the international image of the man who tortured the Cuban people for well over a half century. Despite the fact that Fidel Castro is viewed by many on the left side of the political aisles as some sort of gun-toting revolutionary for freedom, nothing could in fact be further from the truth. The fact of the matter is, Fidel Castro is perhaps arguably the most brutal dictator in the Western Hemisphere of all living memory. He worked to silence political dissidents. He also worked to strip and deprive people of their fundamental and inalienable God-given rights, and he also took a position that was diametrically opposed to the United States of America. He acted with sheer, unadulterated hatred, and he sought to embarrass the United States at any given opportunity. I believe it is for that reason that the frothing-at-the-mouth Fabian socialist leftists and their allies in the rank and file of the graduates of Pavlov's School of Journalism for the salivating mainstream media have gone so far out of their way to try and galvanize and lionize as well as idolize this piece of human excrement, for lack of a better term. We see that at least for the past 50 years, they have gone out of their way to paint Castro in glowing terms. In fact, it was Herbert Matthews with the New York Times who back in 1959 had gone so far as to call the raging dictator a man of destiny, a man who was simply ahead of his time in a sense. That was certainly the sense that I got from that Matthews piece all the way back from February of 1959. And folks, it was on New Year's Day, 1959, that Fidel Castro had managed to seize the reins of political power of the island nation of Cuba. Of course, we all know of the long, strained history and relations between Cuba and their neighbors 90 miles to the north here in these United States of America. It was during the height of the Cold War that the Cuban Missile Crisis pushed the entire globe to the brink of nuclear holocaust, and one of the main agitators of that is the now late 90-year-old Fidel Castro Ruiz. But despite the undeniable, voluminous evidence and the great weight of the evidence that clearly demonstrates that Fidel Castro was not a good influence on Cuba, nor was he a good influence on the geopolitical sphere, the left still wants to march forward, attempting to paint this man in as glowing a light as they possibly can, and I think that that is an exercise of complete and total intellectual disingenuousness. And perhaps one of the greatest examples of the left trying to go forth and basically revise history, engaging in that same sort of historical revisionism that we here at Radio Aviation Excellence, the Wright Flyer, have been warning about for well over a year now, folks. It was something that occurred over the weekend on the Fox News channel. Geraldo Rivera, a man whose claim to fame started when he went to hype this show that he was doing in search of the infamous gangster Al Capone's vault in the heart of the city of Chicago, actually found it to be empty. And that's kind of his intellectual capacity, that of being merely empty. He was also, during the height of the War on Terror back in 01, 02, and 03, a blemish on the record of Fox News Channel when he drew out the troops' positions in the sand, thereby blowing the operation and potentially placing our servicemen and women's lives in grave danger and jeopardy. That is the man who is just well known for his sabotage style of journalism, if you can even call the drivel that he produces journalism. But folks, it doesn't stop there. We see that on Saturday's Fox and Friends program, shortly after the death of the longtime Cuban dictator had been announced, he went forth and demonstrated the complete lack of objectivity that has gripped the hearts, souls, and minds of true dyed-in-the-wool, frothing-at-the-mouth Fabian socialist leftists. This story is in Newsbusters, and it's by Tom Bloomer. It was published on November 26, 2016, and entitled Geraldo on Castro. All awful view is simplistic, and that Castro will be remembered fondly. It was during this appearance that Geraldo went so far as to try and make Castro appear as though he was some great figure, when in fact nothing, truly nothing, could be further from the truth. And it's shocking, really, to think about it, is that they are so willing to always bend the truth. They are never willing to divorce or distance themselves from their propagandistic narrative and agenda. And of course, that is why we have named them here at Radio Aviation Excellence, the Wright Flyer, as the rank and file of Pavlov's School of Journalism for the salivating mainstream media. But of course, we don't want you to take merely our word for it. We want you to know what these people said and to hear what these people said from their own lips. So I've got a video clip that I want to go ahead and cue up with respect to the machinations of Geraldo Rivera, because, as you know, he is the type that would go out of his way to essentially disregard the truth at any available and given opportunity. So I'm going to go ahead and cue that audio up now. So here we go.
These are important, but if you look at the legacy of Fidel Castro, his people did want to leave their country. There was massive oppression and lockdowns of political dissidents and opponents. Middle class suffered greatly, set them back decades. So why the reflexive desire for some to see him as this cult hero and anything other than he was, which was a dictator who suppressed his people?
Well, I think that, God bless you, I think that that is an accurate summary, Pete, of the Castro on the dark side. But on the other side, if you were from the middle down in Cuban society, in the hierarchy, and you got free medicine that you didn't have under the dictator Batista, if you got some, if you could start a little business, if you could get access to higher education that you couldn't get unless you were an elite under Batista, the dictator that preceded communism and Castro and led to the revolution, you think of Castro in a whole different way. And I think that, in fairness, when you look at him and you talk about him, and I heard Governor Huckabee and slamming him, and he's a creep and a dictator.
Folks, what we saw right there, what we we're witnessing right there can only be described as the cancerous doctrine of moral relativism. You see, what Geraldo was attempting to do was to essentially give Castro a free pass because of the left-wing pet projects of free healthcare and universal education. Of course, when you stop and think about that in a logical and objective fashion, you discover that nothing could be further from the truth. There is no such thing as a free lunch. Somebody somewhere had to expend the time, effort, energy, what we call commodities, in order to bring about the end product. So it means that someone somewhere is not really getting the full compensation for their effort and their time and their skills and their labor. And folks, by any other name, that is theft. It's outright unadulterated theft. I can think of no more apt of description to define what that is. And that's certainly the sort of fluff that Geraldo was trying to sit there and say. Basically, what he was showing is the lack of value that the frothing at the mouth Fabian socialist leftists put on the idea of life. We know that they don't, based on their positions with respect to basically having restriction-free abortion, abortion on demand, and this just carries over into the other facets of their belief set and ideology. But of course, it is directly contrary to the clear and concise language contained within the four corners of our shared United States Constitution. And folks, there really is no way to sugarcoat nor to candy coat that. That is a very vile, wicked, and just evil approach to the human condition. And it also shows that they view our well-established supreme law of the land, which pursuant to Article 6, Clause 2, what is known in the common vernacular as the Supremacy Clause, is the supreme law of the land. They think it's quaint, antiquated, outdated, inapplicable to a fast-paced modern society like that in which we live today, when in fact, again, nothing really, truly, nor honestly could be further from the truth. But we know that that's not where he stops. He goes on in that clip to further explain the positions that he had and why we should hold Castro in the highest regard and to basically revere all that he has done. And again, it's, I think, a very shallow-minded approach. It's an incorrect approach, but again, we'll continue to hear it from the lips of the man himself.
Dictator and a repressive monster and all the rest. But if you ask the man in the street in Havana today, sure, they want to be in Miami or New York, and they want to have cell phones and so forth.
Because they don't have free speech. The man on the street couldn't talk because they'd be jailed if they were an opponent.
Well, I've been to Cuba several times, particularly back in those days when they were really shut off. I think that it's very easy to have a simplistic view that he was all awful for Cuba and the world, and I just don't think that's accurate. I think that the Cubans have a tremendous sense of pride over his legacy, and I think that he will be remembered fondly. Yes, he was a leftist. Yes, he was a communist. Yes, his economic system failed. But the fact of the matter is, I mean, the Cuban medicine is renowned the world over. There are aspects of what he left behind that I think will be remembered.
We're going to have to break this up. Back to your neutral corners. We're going to have to break this up.
I mean, folks, you really cannot make this stuff up. That is what Geraldo Jerry Rivers Rivera actually believes. He actually believes that the good of Castro, the quote-unquote good, which is actually not good at all, will be fondly remembered by the Cuban people. Why would the Cuban people want to fondly remember a man whose legacy is that of sheer unadulterated terror, barbarism, murder, and despotism? When you stop and think about it and put it in those lights, the natural yearning of all humanity is to be free. That is the natural condition of humanity. And again, when you look at the natural law tenets that underpin both our shared United States Constitution as well as our constitutionally endowed Federalist representative Republican form of government, you see that it is actually the longest contiguous or uninterrupted running constitutional document in the entire scope of human events. In other words, no time in world history has there been a more successful, open, honest, free, and, dare I say, stable form of government as that of these United States of America. But that's the sort of thing that people like Geraldo wish to ignore. Geraldo has spent decade after successive decade attempting to trash and smear the United States, attempting to champion and lionize the ideals of communism and frothing at the mouth Fabian socialist leftism. All of those things which stand in stark and direct opposition to our tenets and our form of government, which we have held so near and dear for a period stretching over 235 plus years. These are the sorts of things that simply cannot be ignored, yet that is what Geraldo's doing. And recall that one of the things that Geraldo said was that he had been to Cuba back in the era when they were truly repressed and closed off, and that this somehow gives him a blank slate or a blank canvas to paint the rose-hued picture that he's attempting to of this barbaric dictator. In fact, he was very infamous, he being Geraldo, of course, for going back and interviewing Fidel Castro in 1977, in which he did a fluff piece for the dictator, and this was when he worked for ABC News. He mostly defended the Cuban dictator, whose death, as we have stated here at Radio Aviation Excellence, the Wright Flyer, was announced late Friday evening, the day after our Thanksgiving holiday. But folks, I think it's important to try and go back to the actual video footage of Geraldo during that 1977 interview, so you can hear just how much he was willing to be an apologist for Castro in the time that he himself admitted on that Fox and Friends interview was the time that they were the most repressive. I mean, folks, you cannot make this stuff up. So I'm going to go ahead and cue up this old footage so that we can hear it for ourselves, and then we will analyze it a little bit further after that point. So here we go.
It's 20 minutes up right now. Geraldo Rivera has been reporting yesterday and today on Cuba, and today his encounter with Fidel Castro and a tour of some of the attractions that earned Cuba its romantic reputation. Geraldo?
Good morning and welcome to Havana Harbor, where a Soviet freighter, one of many, lies anchored, waiting its turn to come into this busy port. It's symbolic, I think, that just a couple of hundred yards away from that anchored Russian ship is this boarded up and melancholy-looking building. This, ladies and gentlemen, used to be the American Embassy. Since the Cuban Revolution, it's been closed up, run just by the Swiss. But as you know, times are changing. And very soon, at least some Americans will be coming back.
We have always insisted on the idea.
At an informal news conference at which he welcomed Mary Hemingway, the author's widow, back to Cuba, Fidel Castro spoke of his people's announced affection for the people of the United States.
That here there is a spirit of friendship, really of friendship. You will find nowhere hostility.
What do you think about the fact that Cuba and the United States will have relations soon?
I think that it will be good for both and for everyone, because relation with all the countries good for everything, for everyone.
Are you happy? This gentleman's sentiments were echoed over and over again by everyone I spoke with during our stay in Cuba. There's now no doubt at all in my mind that these people would very much like to see more of us. So the question has to be, who are they? These citizens of the communist nation located right next door.
those people were a repressed people. Those people were a people that were denied a voice. They were the people that Fidel Castro had been terrorizing for several generations, and would go on to terrorize for another 30 plus years. You see, this is the sort of thing that Geraldo was wanting to sweep under the rug. He was trying to, show that the people were always separated from their government. And it's one of those things that I had pointed out on the Solo Flight special edition that I did covering the news of the death of Fidel Castro, and very briefly touching upon the history of the rise of that communist dictator, in which, when you look at the opening lines to our shared United States Constitution, and in particular with respect to the preamble to that said document, you see that it states inexplicably, in no uncertain terms, that we, the people of these United States of America, ordained and established our government. In other words, we are a part of the government because that government belongs to us. Of course, Fidel Castro was trying to say that his movement was that of liberating the Cuban people, and there can be no question that Fertucio or whatever, Fertencia rather, Batista was a dictator. But the fact of the matter is, Batista did not bring about the geopolitical sphere reacting in such a way by embracing hardline Stalinist-style communism to have sanctions brought against his people. And the people suffered in Cuba because of Fidel Castro's radicalized view of revolution, of wanting to spread it across the globe. This particularly in the time that the United States of America was concerned with the domino theory. After all, when he rose to power, the Korean conflict was a fresh memory, and United States involvement in the communist nation of Vietnam was beginning in earnest. So the mindset that existed at that time was one in which Fidel Castro had been pushing the communist nation ever further to the left, ever further to radicalized communism. And again, I don't think that that serves the best interest of the Cuban people. But again, it's important that we continue with our examination of what Geraldo was attempting to say all the way back in 1977, because again, it speaks directly to the sort of thing that he was trying to accomplish, and again, that's not in the best interest of either the American people or the Cuban people. So here we go.
Well, for one thing, their Latin exuberance hasn't totally evaporated despite 17 years of communist rule. This is their carnival. Now, it used to be that Cuba celebrated Carnival at the end of winter, like every other country. But that's right in the middle of Cuba's harvesting season, so Castro pragmatically decreed that henceforth their Carnival would happen in the middle of July. It's not exactly Rio or New Orleans, but it's not Warsaw or Moscow either. I had never been to pre-revolutionary Cuba, so it was all new to me, and the differences between this place and the other Caribbean island nations I visited were obvious, but not extreme. The first thing that strikes you are the political posters. They've replaced commercial billboards, and like most propaganda, their messages are intended to be both heroic and inspirational. In this tropical paradise setting, though, they seem instead harsh and unattractive. Much more in tune with the spirit of the regular people is the way they treat their children. There seems to be a real respect here for that youngest generation. Another aspect of Cuban life that jumps out at you is how the people get around. This island is actually the elephant's burial ground for old American cars. Since we imposed the blockade on Cuba 17 years ago, they've had to stretch their collective imaginations to keep these old heaps running. Every U.S.-made car in Cuba dates back at least to the 1950s, shades of American graffiti. If and when the new wave of tourism actually begins, Cuba will have adequate hotels. They have all the old places seized after the revolution.
All the places seized after the revolution, and then, of course, going out of his way to try and paint Cuba as some sort of tropical communist paradise. Again, folks, this is the sort of chicanery, the sort of intellectually disingenuous fluff that has come to dominate the coverage by the rank and file of the graduates of Pavlov's School of Journalism for the salivating mainstream media with respect to Cuba and their hardline Stalinist-style dictator. But of course, nothing could be further from the truth. This is insulting to those who lost friends, family, and loved ones. And I think it's important to note just the stark difference that we see with respect to the way that the frothing at the mouth Fabian socialist leftists and their allies and the graduates of Pavlov's School of Journalism for the salivating mainstream media have been covering the death of the long-time and oppressive despot and potentate to those members whose family suffered directly under it. For instance, Marco Rubio has come forth and stated that what has happened in Cuba is that the communist dictator is dead, but the communist dictatorship remains alive. And Ted Cruz went forth and lambasted current and outgoing President Barack Hussein Obama for essentially taking a weak position, which further strengthens the dictatorship that is currently being run by Fidel Castro's younger brother, Raul. Now, what's so fascinating, if you can call it fascinating, is this great gulf of ideology that exists between the American right and the American left. Even though President-elect Donald J. Trump had said before he had managed to clinch the nomination and before he had officially thrown his quaff into the ring to run for president of these United States of America, that Obama's attempt to open up relations with Cuba was a good thing. He now says that Fidel Castro was a notorious barbarian. And rinse and repeatus, the former RNC chair and now the incoming White House chief of staff, went so far as to say that President-elect Trump will certainly restore the old hardline standing restrictions and sanctions that had been imposed against the communist island, which is located a mere 90 miles south of the state of Florida. But what we see is that people like Geraldo Rivera don't want the communist dictator to be lambasted or to be remembered in harsh, negative tones. He calls it an oversimplistic view and once again just assumes that elitist, snob-like position and pedestal that those in the Fabian society always do. But what really comes to the surface here, folks, is that there is an opportunity here to push Cuba to finally end its communist stance. But that is not the position that the left is taking. It's not the position that the domestic terrorist organizations like Black Lives Matter take either. And I will get into further detail in that, or with respect to that rather, during the next segment. But what we need to fully realize here is that people like Geraldo Rivera are that detached from reality. They're ignoring the fact that Little Havana, located in Miami, Florida, erupted in a carnival-like atmosphere upon hearing the news of the passing of that most brutal and tyrannical dictator. The last thing that we as a nation and as a people should be doing is anything that would empower his brother Raul Castro, allowing the communist regime to tighten its grip, its vice-like stranglehold on the reins of political power of that once prosperous Caribbean island just south of Florida. But Literally, what we are facing here is an approach to unleash that type of communist mentality here in the United States. Cultural Marxism has become the hallmark of the disastrous 2 terms of the Barack Hussein Obama regime. And no, folks, there really is no way of getting around that. He has been trying to weaken the position of the United States of America at every available opportunity. And I believe that his attempt to try and open up relations with the communist fortress island of Cuba was also an attempt to further weaken America's hegemonic position in the arena of geopolitical affairs. This is the sort of thing that someone like a Geraldo Jerry Rivers Rivera would basically champion. It's the type of ideology that he always wanted. Recall that during that clip he said he had never seen pre-revolution Cuba, so that it was all new to him, and he thought it was great. And just as recently as this past Saturday, he said that it was marvelous that the communist dictatorship had basically passed universal health care, falling into the same intellectually disingenuous lie that filmmaker Michael Moore had with trying to say that Cuba has the best health care in the world, when in fact nothing, truly and absolutely nothing, could be further from the truth. One of the interesting aspects to take into consideration with respect to the whole drama that seems to be playing out with the passing of the long-term dictator of that communist island located a mere 90 miles south of the state of Florida is a piece that was published yesterday on November 27, 2016 in the New York Post by Laura Italiano. She published a piece that said, or that is entitled rather, as Inside Fidel Castro's Life of Luxury and Ladies While the Country Starved. And folks, right from the title alone, you can take away this undeniable fact that these sorts of communistical dictatorships, or any form or facet of frothing at the mouth left-wing Fabian socialist ideology, is done with an holier-than-thou attitude and is basically hypocrisy personified. Fidel Castro had created this ruse of an idea that he was a man of the people. He shrouded his rise to power, which began on New Year's Day of 1959, as a proclaimed man of the people, and he once even had basically professed to the Cuban people via the nationally owned state-run media that was just a branch of his Communist Party that he was a man of little means, living on 900 pesos a month, which is the equivalent of 43 American dollars. But in fact, nothing could be further from the truth. It is estimated that he has amassed an estate worth well over $1 billion during his half-century rule of the island there in the Caribbean. And of course, his appearance was also something that was carefully cultivated. It was one of a slovenly bearded man who wore crinkled olive drab uniforms. Of course, this was done not out of what he claimed, that it was all that was available thanks to the harsh economic sanctions that had been placed on his communist island due to his hardline policy positions that were in favor with that of the darkest dictatorship of the Soviet Union of Joseph Stalin during those dark and twisted days of the Second World War. It was actually due to his own laziness, that he just wanted to have comfort. And unlike what he proclaimed, that he lived in a fisherman's hut just on the beach somewhere outside of Havana, that really wasn't true either. In fact, Castro, who died Friday night at the age of 90, made a personal fortune, having offered safe haven to drug traffickers, bedding a bevy of women over the decades, and even once threatened his own brother, Raul, with execution when Raul had lapsed into alcoholism in the 90s after the execution of one of their closest confidants and allies from the time of their guerrilla war that led to the establishment of the Castro regime, which continues under the iron-fisted rule of Raul Castro. Of course, what's so hypocritical about that is you consider that he made his vast amount of wealth off of smuggling vice-like goods, things such as drugs and alcohol. That is just par for the course. It was this sort of double life that we see from any dictator that manages to keep a vice-like stranglehold on the reins of political power of his and sometimes her respective nations. And of course, it's always built on a lie. This is why they have to be so paranoid. It's because the people will ultimately turn against them, unlike what Geraldo Rivera was attempting to portray both in 1977 and again just as recently as Saturday, the day after this monstrous dictator was sent to his special reserve spot in hell. The people will most likely not remember Fidel Castro in a shining light. They will, so long as his brother and the dictatorship of the alleged proletariat remains in power there, but it's always the alleged leaders of that dictatorship of the proletariat that carve out a special niche for themselves while their people continue to live in deplorable and horrific conditions. But what Laura Italiano was basically focusing on with this piece is, as she said, while his people suffered, Fidel Castro lived in comfort, keeping everything, including his 8 children, his many mistresses, even his wives, yes, plural, a secret, wrote Juan Rinaldo Sanchez, who happened to be Fidel Castro's longtime bodyguard. And it's interesting to note that he kept his inner family a secret even from Raul, from his closest brother and confidant. Why? Because he did live under this type of paranoia that grips the hearts, souls, and minds of those sorts of totalitarian, despotic potentates at whenever they manage to secure a grip on the reins of political power of their respective nations. And that's something that we simply cannot ignore in these United States of America. We have to see that there are those on the left who are going out of their way to try and say that we should be able to basically send our condolences to the Cuban people for the death of their greatest detractor, their greatest oppressor. In fact, Vermont Senator Nerdface Boyne Sanders had come out and said that it would be right and even honorable of the American people to come out and send their condolences to the Cuban people over the loss of this ruthless and barbaric tyrant. But nothing really could be further from the truth. We should not be lionizing these people that live a double life, who are the personification of hypocrisy, nor should we embrace the ideas that they push forward that help push their people into such deplorable positions. This rubbish notion that Castro is a populist hero because he delivered free health care and universal education to the Cuban people, which differentiated and distinguished him from his predecessor, Fulgencio Batista. It's again trying to deflect the truth, trying to belittle the fact and to obfuscate the truth as the frothing at the mouth Fabian socialist leftists and their allies in the rank and file of the graduates of Pavlov's School of Journalism for the salivating mainstream media always attempt to do. It is not the truth. And as the great philosopher Aristotle had said in his magnus opus of The Art of Rhetoric, people are essentially more willing to accept the truth because it's far easier to believe. Therefore, you have to use duress and find other ways to force people to believe that which is naturally unbelievable. Of course, that's what the charlatans like Geraldo Rivera do. They peddle these falsehoods, they peddle these untruths in order to try and secure a legacy that simply doesn't exist. Yet they don't afford this same type of coverage to those whom they resist politically. It's as Geraldo Rivera had attacked Texas Senator Ted Cruz all throughout this disastrous fiasco of a 2016 presidential election cycle. He wanted to vilify him, but he also wanted the success of Donald Trump. And you see, It's that he's drawn to this authoritarian strain. While we here at Radio Aviation Excellence, the Wright Flyer, certainly are not hoping for the failure of Donald Trump, and we are praying beyond all hope that he actually does rule as a good conservative leader who seeks to remove the chains and shackles that have been inhibiting the true ultimate wielders of popular sovereignty in this once thriving and flourishing representative republic of ours, we the people. We are also very cognizant and aware of the fact that he himself shares this type of authoritarian strain. It's interesting to note that he did go to Twitter to basically proclaim that Fidel Castro was a ruthless dictator. However, before he decided to officially throw his hat in the ring in July of 2015, and shortly after, Barack Hussein Obama had engaged in his frothing-at-the-mouth Fabian socialist leftist agenda of opening relations with Cuba without gaining anything in return for the United States, he said that it was a good idea. Now, however, we know that Rinse and Repeatus, the former RNC chair turned White House chief of staff for President-elect Donald Trump, has said that Trump would be perfectly willing, ready, and able to continue with the sanctions that have been placed on the communist island 90 miles south of the state of Florida since 1961. But the myth is amazing with Castro. Most Cubans had no idea how or even where their dictatorial leader lived. They knew nothing about him, only what the state-run media had portrayed. And you see, that's part of the danger of the media conglomerations. That's sort of the danger that we face here in these United States of America with respect to with respect to the graduates of Pavlov's School of Journalism for the salivating mainstream media. They are willing to push an agenda that is a propagandistic narrative come hell or high water. They will not divorce themselves, nor will they distance themselves from it, because they feel that that is more important than reality, that a faulty, false narrative and perception are more important. And again, this is part of the reason why we have reiterated on previous episodes of Radio Aviation Excellence, the Wright Flyer, that in the arena of American politics, that these narratives and perceptions, whether they be erroneous or not, oftentimes matter more than reality itself. It's because they are following Joseph Goebbels' tenets of propaganda, saying that if you repeat a lie often enough, it will certainly become the truth. Well, that's what they were trying to do with Fidel Castro. The problem is that Joseph Goebbels had also warned that the propaganda wouldn't work unless it was boomerang-proof. But we find that the truth always has a way of shining through, and that the lies will fall and falter, just as they did in the Third Reich under the totalitarian regime of Adolf Hitler. But we know with Cuba that he cheated on his first wife, the upper-middle-class Mirta Diaz-Balart, with Natalia Revuelta, and what Sanchez had said was Revuelta, with her green eyes, her perfect face, and her natural charm, was one of Havana's most beautiful women. And it didn't matter to Castro or to Revuelta that she too was married at the start of their mid-1950s affair. Diaz-Balart would bear Castro his first official son, Fidel Jr. or Fidelito, but it's important to also recall that he had kept the existence of his son secret from his brother, who now rules the communist island, Raul Castro. And we also know that Revuelta would bear Castro his only daughter, Alina. Now, Castro had also cheated on his second wife, seducing comrade Celia Sanchez, his private secretary, confidant, and, as Sanchez put it, guard dog, for over 30 or so years. He also bedded his English interpreter, the one that we saw in that clip from Geraldo dating back to 1977, his French interpreter, and a Cuban airline stewardess who attended him on foreign trips, according to Sanchez. And Sanchez went on to state that he doubtlessly had other relations that Sanchez didn't know about. And this comes from Sanchez's book, The Double Life of Fidel Castro, My 17 Years as Personal Bodyguard to El Líder Máximo. And it's important to see that these communists always do live this sort of double life, that it's always what's good for the goose is not necessarily good for the gander. And it's a type of danger that we see with even our own political elite in these United States of America. I think that that was part of the main reasons why the American electorate had rejected Hillary Rodham Clinton. And of course, with the announcement that Melania Trump doesn't want to move into the White House until after her 10-year-old son Barron finishes school there in his New York private preparatory academy, she will stay in Trump Tower. Of course, there may be an ulterior motive here. Making the Secret Service pay top dollar rent for rooms in Trump Tower seems to be the type of bait and switch scheme that Trump enjoys. Recall that he had said 16 years ago that he would be the first person to ever make money running for president. And now it appears that he also plans to make money hand over fist during his tenure as president of these United States of America. If he is actually serious about not taking a salary as President of the United States of America, he should waive the rent fees for all of the security and bodyguard personnel that are, by necessity of his high-ranking office, required to stay near his physical presence. But of course, I'm not going to hold my breath with respect to that. Castro, however, had kept 20 luxurious properties throughout the Caribbean nation, including his own island, accessed via a yacht decorated entirely in exotic wood imported from Angola, according to Sanchez. And he had taken control of Cuba, as I mentioned, on New Year's Day 1959, after that army had routed the quarter-century-long dictatorship of Fulgencio Batista. Castro vowed that unlike his hated predecessor, he'd share the nation's wealth with its poorest citizens. Again, this is him shrouding himself in that populist drivel and notion that all of these tin-pot communistical dictators do, because that is the only way that they can convince the people that they are not operating against their direct and best interests. Of course, nothing could be further from the truth, and it's just par for the course for this type of nonsense. But while he made good on some of his promises, this is according to Laura Italiano, to educate and care for his people, building alleged free schools and hospitals with the help of his Soviet sponsors, again requiring money to come from somewhere, Castro's legacy was also one of repression and hypocrisy, and that is the legacy that you always see with these type of strongman dictators that seek to oppress their people and to rule through a command centralized authority. It's why our founding fathers, in their near infinite wisdom and foresight, determined to decentralize power by establishing the separation of powers in the clear and concise language contained within the four corners of our shared United States Constitution. But we see that deep poverty persisted, and teen prostitution, as well as crumbling houses, food rations, political opponents being executed by the thousands, either by firing squad or had been sentenced to decades of hard labor, where they were essentially slave laborers for the regime. And Castro had as many as 11 children with 4 women, only 2 of whom were his wife, and numerous other mistresses. This is all the type of just ridiculous sort of hypocrisy that has become the hallmark of this long-term, frothing at the mouth leftist dictator that ruled the island nation and had been a thorn in the side of the United States all the way back into just a few years after he rose to ascendancy. These sorts of things are what people like Geraldo Rivera and various other organizations, such as the Black Lives Matters communist organization, are trying to hide and repress. They don't want the truth getting out because it could rightfully illegitimize their movement, illegitimize the attempts that they are moving forward with to attempt to fundamentally and, dare I say, irreparably transform these United States of America away from being the constitutionally endowed federalist representative republic that we know and love into some frothing at the mouth Fabian socialist leftist Orwellian dystopia and nightmare. They want us to be like Cuba, because in their mind that is a paradise. People's suffering is their approach. And of course it shows with what little regard they hold human life and our sacred, fundamental, and inalienable rights, which were endowed to us by our Creator, who happens to be none other than the God of nature himself. This is the sort of ridiculous trite that we have to deal with. It's the sort of mythology that we have to dispel. And when people like Geraldo Rivera and President Barack Hussein Obama go forth and sing the laudable lionized praises of these brutal authoritarian dictators, it shows just how disconnected from reality they truly are. This is why socialism and other forms of leftist philosophy and ideology always fail in practice. It is a mere theory, but when theory is applied, it fails abysmally. On the other hand, when you look at our shared United States Constitution and the Federalist Representative Republic that it established, we see that in practice that is the longest contiguous or uninterrupted running constitutional document and Federalist Republic in the entire course of human events. In other words, no other nation in the history of the world has created as open, honest, free, nor as secure or stable a government as we have in these United States of America. Yet these dangerous forces, these maniacal forces on the left who operate with ulterior motives, don't care. They simply proclaim that their ideology has failed because the wrong people were the ones to try and implement it. But it will fail each and every time because it does not take into account human nature or the fact that the ambitions of those in government merely wither on the vine, as that childishly naive Karl Marx said in the Communist Dialectic or Manifesto, which he penned back in the 1840s. But we see that with Castro again, there was only one woman who dared to cause him any public scandal, and that was his rebellious daughter, Elena Fernandez Revuelta. Sanchez had wrote, quote, "I remember her in the 1980s, a pretty young woman who had become a model. One day, when I was in Fidel's anteroom, Pepin Nanjaro, his aide-de-camp, showed up with a copy of the magazine Cuba. Spread across its second page, Elena could be admired posing on a sailboat in a bikini in an advertisement for Havana Club rum. What on earth is this?" Sanchez said that Fidel had exclaimed. "Call Elena at once." And this followed in a row. For 2 hours, Elena had been fighting with her father, and it was memorable. Shouting, which reverberated all over the room, shaking the walls of the presidential office, had ensued. And Sanchez had said that Castro was railing that everybody knows you are my daughter, which is funny when you recall that he had kept her existence a secret from everyone. Posing in a bikini like that is unseemly. Several years later, in 1993, Fidel would learn through his Secret Service that Elena was plotting to flee to the United States. Turning to his dark nature, the Cuban dictator had chastised them. "I'm warning you, Elena must not leave Cuba under any pretext or in any way." And he was directing that towards his head bodyguard, Colonel Jose Delgado Castro, according to Sanchez. "You've been warned," Castro said. Yet 2 months later, Elena had put on a wig, packed a false Spanish passport, and with the help of a network of international accomplices, snuck out of Cuba. And that ignited the dictator's terror and anger. He basically lambasted his security entourage, calling them a bunch of incompetents, wanting and demanding a full report on just exactly how his daughter had managed to disaffect to the United States of America. Alina now lives in the United States, particularly in the city of Miami. And she would later tell the Miami Herald that, quote, "When people tell me he's," meaning Castro, "a dictator, I tell them that's not the right word. Strictly speaking, Fidel is a tyrant. She's right, but he was also a dictator. Everything he did had to be done through his office and through the auspices of his good graces, and he was not below throwing his own close confidants and allies under the bus." We know that Castro's second wife and widow, Dalia Soto Deval, is the least known of Castro's women. They had met in 1961 as Castro had delivered an open-air speech, and he caught a glimpse of her in the audience. According to Sanchez, Fidel spotted in the first row a gorgeous girl with whom he rapidly started exchanging furtive and meaningful glances. After being vetted by his aide-de-camp, Deval was installed in a discreet house just outside Havana. Eventually, they married and had 5 sons who grew up in hidden luxury on an estate, again, just outside Havana. Sanchez described this with its orange, lemon, mandarin, grapefruit, and banana trees. The estate resembled a veritable Garden of Eden, especially if one compared it with the notorious ration book that all Cubans had to use to procure food. Each member of the family also possessed his or her own cow, so as to satisfy each one's individual taste, since the acidity and creaminess of fresh milk varies from one cow to another. Again, this is the sort of blatant hypocrisy that dominates in these type of communistical and frothing-at-the-mouth Fabian socialist leftist dictatorships. This is why we decry people like Nerdface Bernie Sanders, Hillary Rotten Clinton, and even, yes, Donald J. Trump, who originally supported the opening of relations with Cuba, that is, before he decided that he would run for the highest office in the land. This is the sort of thing that cannot be ignored, nor can it be swept under the rug. Yet the members of the graduates of Pavlov's School of Journalism for the salivating mainstream media, such as Geraldo Jerry Rivers Rivera, want to do exactly that. They don't want you to know the startling truth and harsh reality and facts with respect to their idols of leftist tyranny, despotism, but above all, oppression. But we see that disloyalty exacted a heavy price in the paranoid island nation of Cuba. Dissidents were jailed for as little as handing out books on democracy. Yet Castro himself, further showing that what's good for the goose is not necessarily good for the gander under this type of despotic system, displayed little loyalty, either professionally or personally. Even his closest aides faced execution if it suited his agenda. Back in the 1980s, according to Sanchez, when an international scandal brewed over Castro's exchanges of safe haven for cash with Colombian cocaine traffickers, Castro had no problem throwing those closest to him under the bus. Very simply, a huge drug trafficking transaction was being carried out at the highest echelons of the state, Sanchez claimed. Castro was directing illegal operations like a real godfather. Revolutionary General Arnaldo Ochoa, who fought by the side of Castro and his brother in that war that led them to power, was at the center of the drug dealings, Sanchez said. And of course, under that type of a system, he would have had to have been installed by Fidel himself. Raul was forced to watch on closed-circuit television as a kangaroo court tried and convicted Ochoa, and then forced to watch the general's execution by firing squad. Sanchez noted that Castro made all of them bear witness to it. Again, this is attempting to rule by the fiat of fear. That's exactly what these frothing-at-the-mouth Fabian socialist leftist demagogues always do. It's never what's good for everyone is good for them. It's that they must rule by terror because their ideology would be rejected as theft under any other name. But it goes on. That's what the Comandante was capable of to keep his power, not just of killing, but also of humiliating and reducing to nothing men who had served him devotedly. After Ochoa's death, Raul had plunged into alcoholism, drowning his grief and humiliation with Russian vodka. Castro had warned, "Listen, I'm talking to you as a brother. Swear to me that you will come out of this lamentable state, and I promise you nothing will happen to you." Raul fully understood that his life was on the line, and that if he was unable to break his alcoholic addiction, that his brother would surely make a public spectacle of him, as he had with Revolutionary General Antonio Ochoa, and that he would publicly execute him much the same way. That is the type of evil and wickedness that people like Geraldo Rivera and the rest of the graduates of Pavlov School of Journalism for the salivating mainstream media don't want the American public, or indeed the general public across the globe, to know. But it is important that we know that, because that is the harsh, stark reality that always exists when you turn to such left-wing ideologues and demagogues. One of the things that we also need to discuss, folks, is this notion of how the agent provocateurs of the frothing-at-the-mouth Fabian socialist leftist organizations throughout this country are trying to rather facetiously attempt to lionize the image and legacy of the Cuban dictator and strongman who died on Friday at the age of 90 years old, Fidel Castro. We here at Radio Aviation Excellence, the Wright Flyer, have oftentimes lambasted the Black Lives Matter organization as being nothing short of a cultural Marxist front group that is doing everything within its power to drive a wedge between the true ultimate wielders of popular sovereignty of this once thriving and flourishing representative republic of ours, we the people, against one another. And they are doing so not because of the oppression of which they complain, and of course that includes the laughably ridiculous notion of the so-called systemic racism which they promote as ailing and afflicting and plaguing this beloved representative republic, and is more akin to just trying to basically go down the lines of that Cloward and Piven strategy that was developed in the mid-20th century by those two egghead academicians from Columbia University in seeking to establish a permanent welfare state in these United States of America. Cloward and Piven were hoping to overwhelm the current existing welfare system, forcing the American people on their knees so that they would crawl to the government on said bended knees and beg them to fix the overwhelmed system from the violence and the dark and twisted machinations that they had unleashed upon the American nation. Of course, that's the same type of intellectually disingenuous drivel that we always have to be cognizant and aware of. It fully explains how the frothing-at-the-mouth Fabian socialist leftists are hell-bent on the complete and utter annihilation of the United States, both as a nation and as a people. This piece comes from Amber Randall at the Daily Caller News Foundation. She wrote a piece on November 27th at 3:06 p.m. entitled "Black Lives Matter, We Must Come to the Defense of Castro." Already we see that they are moving into a position of advocacy where they're trying to strengthen their ties with the late communistical dictator. And Amber starts her piece with, "Former Cuban dictator Fidel Castro's legacy provides many lessons to learn from, according to Black Lives Matter. After Castro's death Friday, Black Lives Matters released an article titled Lessons from Fidel, Black Lives Matters and the Transition of El Comandante. And we see already that they are just putting this forth in glowing terms. And the Daily Caller actually linked this article, and so I'm pulling it up now just so that we can delve a little bit into it before we go back to analyzing exactly what is going on with this frothing at the mouth Fabian socialist leftist organization. The thing that was posted yesterday and by the Black Lives Matters website, it says Lessons from Fidel, Black Lives Matters and the transition of El Comandante. They basically start off with, we are feeling many things as we awaken to a world without Fidel Castro. There is an overwhelming sense of loss, complicated by fear and anxiety. Although no leader is without their flaws, there, folks, is the moral relativism that these leftist totalitarians always go for. We must push back against the rhetoric of the right and come to the defense of El Comandante. And there are lessons that we must revisit and heed as we pick up the mantle in changing our world, as we aspire to build a world rooted in a vision of freedom and the peace that only comes with justice. So there's your social justice warriors. It is a lesson that we take from Fidel. From Fidel, we know that revolution is sparked by an idea, by radical imaginings, which sometimes take root first among just a few dozen people coming together in the mountains. It can be a tattered group of meager resources like in Sierra Maestro in 1956 or St. Elmo Village in 2013. Again, this shows that the frothing at the mouth Fabian socialist leftist agent provocateurs of anarchy, chaos, and destruction are trying to lionize this man who killed countless thousands of his own citizens. They said revolution is continuous and is won first in the hearts and minds of the people and is continually shaped and reshaped by the collective. So you see, they're embracing communistical collectivist thought. No single revolutionary ever wins or even begins the revolution. That is actually incorrect, but that's how they want to go about it. The revolution begins only when the whole is fully brought in and committed to it. Well, no, that was certainly not the case in the long drawn-out struggle known as the American Revolutionary War. It was not even close to a whole. The revolution begins only when the whole is fully brought in and committed to it. Again, that's not true, and it is never over. Well, no, unless it's based upon the natural law tenets, which of course their reckless ideology is not. Revolution transcends borders. The freedom of oppressed people and people of color is all bound up together wherever we are, in Cuba, South Africa, Palestine, Angola, Tanzania, Mozambique, Grenada, Venezuela, Haiti, African Americans, and North Dakota. We must not only root for each other, but invest in each other's struggles, lending our voices, bodies, and resources to liberation efforts, which may seem distant from the immediacy of our daily existence. And then it just goes on for several more paragraphs. But they speak of a final lesson is that to be a revolutionary, you must strive to live in integrity. Well, how can you be living in integrity when your entire movement is based on the notions of moral relativism and political correctness? There is no integrity about that. They say, then, as a black network committed to transformation, we are particularly grateful to Fidel for holding Mama Assata Chakra, who continues to inspire us. We are thankful that he provided a home for Brother Michael Finney Ralph Goodwin, who is a terrorist, And Charles Hill, another terrorist. Asylum to Brother Huey P. Newton, another terrorist. And sanctuary for so many other black revolutionaries who were being persecuted by the American government during the Black Power era. We are indebted to Fidel for sending resources to Haiti following the 2010 earthquake and attempting to support black people in New Orleans after Hurricane Katrina, when our government left us to die on rooftops and in floodwaters. That is a bald-faced lie. We are thankful that he provided us a space where the traditional spiritual work of African people could flourish regardless of his belief system. But again, this is more mindless drivel. As we know, Fidel Castro actually promoted racism. He would ignore that it even existed, which was kind of the same type of mentality that Joseph Stalin held in Soviet-era Russia during the height of the Second World War and shortly thereafter. Because in Stalin's mind, murder or homicide could not occur in the workers' paradise. Therefore, there were no homicide police forces. Anyway, they say that reports of Castro's death came in Friday evening. Castro ruthlessly suppressed those who disagreed with him politically in his 47-year reign, according to Amanda Randall. Thousands of Cubans fled to the U.S. from Castro's repressive dictatorship and settled in Miami's Little Havana. The Cuban Archive Project estimated the Castro regime killed over 9,200 people. According to Black Lives Matter, there are many feelings that accompany the death of Castro, like fear, loss, and anxiety, as I had mentioned. The group maintains that Castro's life teaches that revolution can start with a single idea within a small group of people. But it's still a bunch of mindless drivel. It shows us exactly what sort of mantra these people are engaging in. And once again, it is, of course, diametrically opposed to the natural law tenets that we hold near and dear in this once thriving and flourishing representative republic and vibrant community of popular sovereigns of ours. Again, the entire Black Lives Matter organization is just that, a communist organization based on lies, half-truths, and cultural Marxism. They're all about pushing the collective at the cost of the true ultimate wielder of popular sovereignty, we the people, which reminds me of that great quote from Benjamin Franklin, one of our most prolific founding fathers, when he said that those who sacrifice essential liberty for a fleeting sense of security deserve neither liberty nor security and shall surely have neither. He also said that a democracy is when two wolves and a lamb are voting what to eat for lunch. You see, that type of despotism is exactly the sort of collectivist tyranny of the majority, or in this case, tyranny of the discrete and insular minorities, that organizations like Black Lives Matter wish to bring to fruition. Heat Street wrote a piece on this as well by Lucas Malinkos. He said the Black Lives Matters movement has come out in support of Fidel Castro following his death on Friday, saying that they must come to the defense of El Comandante and thanking him for safeguarding Assata Shakur, who's on the FBI's most wanted terrorist list. The movement penned an article on Sunday titled Lessons from Fidel, Black Lives Matters, and the Transition of El Comandante on the Medium platform, where they eulogized the passing of the Cuban dictator. The article, which was not bylined, was tweeted out by the closest thing there is to an official Black Lives Matters account, and also posted on the movement's semi-official Facebook page. The article claims Castro's death has caused an overwhelming sense of loss, complicated by fear and anxiety. You see, folks, this is where the safe space ninnies are looking to gain power. They're seeking to use the twin cancerous doctrines of political correctness and moral relativism, both of which we have declared war upon here at Radio Aviation Excellence, the Wright Flyer, in an attempt to strip and deprive the decent, hard-working, red-blooded American citizens of their fundamental and inalienable God-given rights. This is just the usual stuff that we have heard. It's funny. The article continues by betraying Castro as a model freedom fighter who Black Lives Matter should strive to follow and emulate. It said, as Fidel ascends to the realm of the ancestors, we summon his guidance, strength, and power as we recommit ourselves to the struggle for universal freedom. Then it said, Fidel vive, meaning long live Fidel. Well, no, Fidel won't be living long because Fidel is dead. You see, these people are just disgusting. They're vile in their divisiveness and in their racial animus and hatred. They are a throwback to an era that should never have come to fruition and we should never return to in the United States. They also thanked the Cuban dictator for hiding criminals and domestic terrorists from the U.S. government, such as Michael Finney, Ralph Goodwin, and Charles Hill. Those were the ones who hijacked an airplane from Albuquerque while being sought for the 1972 murder of New Mexico State Trooper Robert Rosenblum. And see, doesn't that actually just connect perfectly with this slew of police killings that have been racially motivated in the United States? Groups such as Black Lives Matter and, of course, outgoing President Barack Hussein Obama, who have fanned the flames of racial animus, should be held accountable for their words, deeds, and actions, for inciting the violence and murderous crime spree that has been ailing and afflicting this once thriving and flourishing representative republic and vibrant community of popular sovereigns of ours. Of course, it's interesting to note that they don't make these connotations. They don't want the people to think that that's all they are about, when in fact that is exactly what they are about and what they have always been about. That's just par for the course with these type of radical, frothing at the mouth, Fabian socialist, leftist, agent provocateurs of death, carnage, chaos, and above all, anarchy. They're seeking to put fear and anxiety into the hearts, souls, and minds of the true ultimate wielders of popular sovereignty, we the people. There's no other way to describe what their organization has done, whether it was that massacre of several innocent police officers in the city of Dallas, Texas, just north of your humble correspondent here back in July, or the recent slaying of a San Antonio and Georgia police officer, and the attempted murder of a St. Louis, Missouri police officer a week before we celebrated our Thanksgiving holiday. You see, folks, again, it comes down to rummaging through all of this divisive drivel that is being passed off as the truth and actually getting to the truth. Why is it that the frothing at the mouth and rank and file of the graduates of Pavlov's School of Journalism for the salivating mainstream media have been very tight-lipped about this aspect of the Black Lives Matter organization, basically singing the praises of one of the most repressive and brutal and, dare I say, barbaric dictators to ever wield the reins of political power in a Western Hemisphere nation? We know that people like Geraldo Rivera, based on the clips that I showed in the first segment, are also trying to basically whitewash and rewrite the legacy of this barbaric dictator. That is just par for the course for these people who are diametrically opposed to the fundamental and natural law tenets that form the bedrock foundation and cornerstone of not only our shared United States Constitution, but also our federalist, constitutionally endowed, representative Republican form of government. They will do anything to double down on this sort of twisted lie. And, of course, they always seek to obfuscate the truth because they know deep down in their heart of hearts and within their souls that no intellectually honest person would ever accept their twisted and dark machinations in the free marketplace of ideas, because it is nothing short of domestic terrorism and promoting theft by any other name. That is the sort of chicanery that we have been warning about here at Radio Aviation Excellence, the Wright Flyer, for over a year and almost 3 months now, folks. These people are doubling down on their efforts to spread fear and terror. They want to lionize a man who did the same thing because they think that that is a righteous cause. But they ignore the fact that he hated blacks. They ignore the fact that he was a racist in his own account, and they ignore the fact rather that he was brutally repressive to the people that were closest to him and had helped him secure his victory on New Year's Day back in the year of 1959. That, again, speaks volumes about just how intellectually disingenuous these frothing-at-the-mouth Fabian socialist leftist agent provocateurs really are. They are wannabe potentates and despots. They wish to strip and deprive every decent, hard-working, and red-blooded American citizen of his or her fundamental and inalienable God-given rights. Why? Because they think that they deserve special treatment. They think that there is something known as positive discrimination. Of course, there really is no such thing. When the law engages in affirmative action, which is known as positive discrimination, at least in legal parlance, that is what is known as a legal fiction. It is something that does not exist in reality and is in fact diametrically opposed to the clear and concise language contained within the four corners of our shared United States Constitution. This is one of the things that they continuously ignore. Why? Because they realize that it would be a fatal blow to their dark and twisted propagandistic narrative and agenda if that became common knowledge. But it should be common knowledge because it speaks to the heart of the matter that their movement is based upon a lie. And I know that I reiterated this in the previous segment, but as Aristotle said in his Art of Rhetoric, people more easily believe the truth because that's what we are essentially hardwired to accept. Therefore, they have to utilize terroristic tactics in order to use the duress of a tyranny of false unity to force their machinations on the rest of us. You see that they are championing all of these ideals that are based in the collective, ignoring the rights of the individual. Yet when you go back to the foundational documents of these United States of America, you can see that the reason that our founding fathers had established this once thriving and flourishing representative republic and vibrant community of popular sovereigns of ours as a representative republic was to protect the sovereign rights of the individual. That is the most fair system. You see, they also wish to twist this notion of equality into being equal outcome as opposed to equal opportunity. That, too, is part of the dark and twisted game of semantics that the left always engages in the hopes of bamboozling the American people. It's as the great visionary Zygmunt Dobbs had warned in his magnus opus, Keynes at Harvard, back in the 1950s and 60s, that these forces will create fluff terms. They will make the terms of traditionally accepted definitions mean different things, and they do it at such a breakneck speed that the true ultimate wielders of popular sovereignty are simply unable to keep up. It's all part of a charade. It is all part of an attempt to lie and to force us to accept something that should never rightfully be accepted in a free and open and honest society like that of the United States of America. But we know that we see that the Hill had told a Washington reporter in the Hill actually being Charles Hill, that terrorist killer, had told a Washington Post reporter back in the 1990s that he had no regrets about killing the state trooper, a father of 2 young daughters. So you see instantly the type of violence and hatred that this group, Black Lives Matter, really operates under. They are seeking to spread pain, panic, fear, and pandemonium, and that makes them a dire threat to our fundamental and inalienable God-given rights. They do not accept our humanity, just as Fidel Castro did not accept our humanity. That is the indelible lesson that we can take away not only from Fidel Castro, but the other left-wing ilk that are seeking to overthrow our government with violent revolution. Now, that's not to say that revolution is always a bad thing. Clearly, this nation was founded upon by the Revolutionary War, but they were based on the natural law tenets. And yes, they paid lip service to that, but these Black Lives Matters terrorists fully display a complete lack of knowledge and understanding of exactly what that struggle entailed. Independence, liberty, self-responsibility, and accountability working in tandem to give us self-determination. That's not what they care about. What they care about is the collective. The rights of the individual should be trampled upon to promote an insular and discrete minority. In other words, freedom should be sacrificed for a false sense of security. And as Benjamin Franklin said, those who sacrifice essential liberties for a fleeting sense of false security deserve neither liberty nor security. They are grateful for that sort of nonsense. They are grateful for the reign of terror and for the obstruction of justice that Fidel Castro had carried out through his over half-century tenure as the tin-pot dictator of the island nation just 90 miles south of the state of Florida. These are the sorts of things that we merely cannot ignore. We need to hold people like Geraldo Rivera and these Black Lives Matter terrorists accountable for their words, deeds, and actions. They are preaching intolerance, and they're attempting to ignore the glaring repression that existed under the Iron Curtain of Cuba and still exists under the tutelage of Fidel's younger brother, Raul Castro. In fact, Fidel, as I had mentioned in the previous segment, was so paranoid that he was willing to execute his own brother for engaging in alcoholism after a close friend and confidant of theirs who had stood by them during their long battle against Batista's forces was forced to be put through a public kangaroo trial and then executed by firing squad by state or in front of the cameras of their state-run media down there. Perhaps Geraldo Rivera, Jerry Rivers, should take all of these Black Lives Matter terrorists and go and have a carnival, a permanent carnival down there in Cuba. Maybe they could find that they could live La Revolucion in the land that despises them. You see, the lip service that was paid to them and the asylum that was paid to those people that they were glorifying was actually done in the spirit of animus. It was not done out of a sense of justice, but of obstructing justice, just as the Black Lives Matters organization seeks to obstruct justice. This is the sort of thing that should never be tolerated in an open, honest, but above all free society like that of the United States of America. It speaks volumes about just how dangerous these frothing at the mouth groups truly are. And they are dangerous. They are seeking to destabilize all that we hold near and dear. It's interesting to see that their Twitter feed was basically a number 3 with the Black Power fist. And they talk about some of the people that were responding to them is strict censorship, imprisoned political enemies, sent LGBT to concentration camps. Those are your flaws. You see, that's what happens when you attempt to create a false narrative. But as we have oft-times reiterated and warned on previous episodes of Radio Aviation Excellence, the Wright Flyer, a false narrative in the arena of American politics, and indeed just in the arena of politics in general, can oft-times matter more than reality. That is the propagandistic agenda that the Black Lives Matter organization is hoping to front upon the true ultimate wielders of popular sovereignty in this once thriving and flourishing representative republic of ours, we the people. They want to bamboozle us. Some of the others say there were no community spaces, art, democratic engagement. He He jailed opposition, educators, artists, and LGBT. They then created, Cynthia Villa, who was on Twitter that did this, created a hashtag that I rather like, hashtag Facts Matter. Jim Hansen then said, Fidel's main man was a racist, El Che. How do you figure he thought Black Lives mattered? Well, he didn't. You see, again, these people are getting the ramifications and repercussions that they deserve by engaging in this sort of drivel and in hoping of basically lionizing a man who is nothing short of a disgusting piece of human excrement. It fully demonstrates how intellectually disingenuous they truly are. You see, it's not about black lives. It's not about anyone's lives except making all lives miserable under a centralized command control style of government and economy that truly has no place in the United States. They want to fundamentally and, dare I say, irreparably transform the United States of America away from being a constitutionally endowed federalist representative republic into a socialist dystopia that belongs in the pages of Orwell's darkest nightmares. But we here at Radio Aviation Excellence, the Wright Flyer, will continue to shed the light of truth on these frauds, these charlatans, these hucksters, these carnival barkers. We will expose their true agenda, and we will hold them accountable for their words, deeds, and actions, because that is what we must do in order to proactively maintain and safeguard our fundamental and inalienable God-given rights. It is indeed the duty, obligation, but above all, responsibility of all of us in our capacity as American citizens to stand up for, to promote, and defend our rights against these forces of intolerance and of lies. That is why they lionize Fidel Castro. It is because they are cut of the same cloth. It is because their mission is that of repression and oppression. And that, of course, must be soundly, completely, totally, and without reservation rejected in these United States of America if we ever hope to restore our beloved republic back to the path of prosperity. That is what we must, and that is what we will and shall do. Now, with that said, it is time for us to begin our descent. As always, folks, I want to thank you for choosing to fly the Wright Flyer. I'm going to go ahead and send the flight attendant back with 2 rounds of alcohol, 1 with eggnog, so that we can celebrate these holidays and also celebrate the passing of this brutal and repressive dictator. Should you have any questions, comments, concerns, or even topic suggestions for us here, please feel free to leave them either in the comment section here on our YouTube page or our Google Plus page, or indeed on our Facebook page. On top of that, I invite you to follow us at Twitter with the Twitter handle at Radio Aviation EX. One more time, folks, that's at Radio Aviation EX, and there you will find the departure board that lists my personal Twitter account as well as the personal Twitter account of my first officer, Jeremy Grapenton. You will also find the Blogspot account where we are putting up extra links to the videos here, as well as audio-only versions of our state-of-the-art radio program. And then you will find the Cafe Press account. As this is the holiday season, folks, you'll find all sorts of trinkets and goodies that make perfect stocking stuffers, say that 5 times fast, with either our traditional Radio Aviation Excellence the Wright Flyer logo on it, or the First Class Passenger logo on it, or even the 2 new Uplifting America logos, with this on hats, shirts, shoes, apparel, watches, clocks, neckties, drinking glasses, shot glasses, mugs, tote bags, laptop sleeves and protectors, and phone sleeves and protectors. Just such a wide array of goods at reasonable prices. You can make your holiday shopping at one stop at the Cafe Press account for Radio Aviation Excellence, the Wright Flyer. Once again, folks, thank you for choosing to fly the Wright Flyer. We'll see you again next time. Please do take care.